In every community up and down the UK, development is something that is done to communities rather than something done by communities or with communities. Many of you listening may well have been part of campaigns in your community opposing bad developments, and this extractive industry generates huge profits for owners and shareholders while providing developments nobody really wanted, or low energy standards, and at unaffordable prices. But perhaps there's another way. In many places, communities are increasingly looking at what developers do and are thinking, well, it doesn't look that hard. We could probably have a go at that. And the new economic story that emerges when we do that is powerful and timely. And this evening, we're most fortunate to be joined by three amazing guests, all of whom have valuable experience and practice in this area. Ever considered yourself or your community as a developer? You will, hopefully, by the end of this session. So we're going to hear from each of our guests, and then we'll have time to ask them questions and hear their thoughts on whatever you'd like to hear their thoughts on, basically. So our first speaker, and it's a joy for me to welcome a friend and colleague with whom I'm part of a project that I suspect you're going to hear a bit about in the next little while. Francis Northrop is a local economic development specialist and an associate fellow with the New Economics Foundation, leading work there on devolution and local government reform. Francis has a long track record of supporting organisations across the UK working for a fairer economy, and is a founding director of Caring Town Totnes, a director of East End Trades Guild, and on the advisory board of We Own It. She's currently advising on projects for the Shipley and Dewsbury town boards. Francis, it's great to have you here. Over to you. The next 10 minutes is yours. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you, Rob. It's really good to be here and see you all. I'm just going to share my screen, but not that one. It went so well when we were practicing. Here we are. Lovely. So I just wanted to start by highlighting this incredible report that was done by colleagues at Shared Assets and the Future Narratives Lab. I think, Richard, you've got a link to it. So if you could put it in the chat, or maybe I can do it afterwards, that would be great. It's really worth reading. It's really good piece of research about what the narrative is about land in this country at the moment, and how it needs to change and how it could change. And the main finding was that basically the land debate is just stuck in the country. It's frozen. We just, we can't shift the way that people think about land. And so there's this, that their finding was that people who have the role in the narrative are the people that we expect to have a role in that narrative. When you think about land and buildings, it's very much about landowners, sometimes homeowners, developers, estate agents, politicians, lawyers, corporations, men in suits. And the people who are absent are the people who actually are who need the land the most. And the inequality there is huge. And then there's sort of people in the middle who are passive within that, who sort of, it kind of, sometimes they get a voice, but not so much. And there's about 5 different frames that they found that people talk about with land narratives. But this is the one that I wanted to speak to this evening. And it's this idea that any change to that is just idealistic and a bit fringe. So this idea that, the common good means that shared and collaborative approaches are possible, they seem idealistic, unrealistic. And also people are, kind of like, oh my God, it's communism. What are you talking about? You're going to make me share my house with people. And so this is the kind of thing that the work that Claude and Immy do and that I do, and lots of other people across the country, we're trying to change that narrative, come up against all the time. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the project that I'm involved in with Rob, which he alluded to, which has been it feels like my life's work, the last 10 years, which is literally a fifth of my life, one project, like still not over. It's quite incredible. But anyway, this is Atmos Totnes. This is a derelict dairy site just by the train station in Totnes. And as you can see, it's it's quite a big site, and it's quite a complex site. It's a brownfield site. And when we when I first moved to Totnes about 10 years ago, people had already started in the town to start to talk about what could they do with it. Nothing was happening with it. The company had closed it because, you know, it wasn't viable anymore to have that processing plant. But, you know, what could the town do with it? And so they formed the Sustainable Business Park Group, and they produced brochures. They called it the Atmos project because partly there's a listed building on the site, which is Brunel's Atmospheric Railway, but also it was, you know, the idea would be for it to be an exemplary low carbon development. All the ideas in that master plan there are basically the ideas that we still are carrying through now. But they thought that if they played the game of the developers and made it look like a developer product, then they would get Dairy Crest to talk to them about working with them to develop the site, but that didn't happen. And so what we needed to do was create a different proposition. We had to start a campaign. So we started Atmos Totnes, the heart of a new economy. And we went out into the town and we spoke to people. We had a cake and people talked about what they wanted, you know, how their memories of the site, how it felt for them that it is closed. At that time, it had been closed for about 5 years. It was falling into dereliction, and it was, you know, nobody could get on the site. And so we started to talk about it. We started gathering people outside the site. There's Jonathan Dimbleby with our mayor, Judy. You know, everybody started to say something different could really happen here. And so what we did was there, you see, that's me and Rob in the top left-hand corner. I look a lot older now. Rob doesn't. I don't really know how that works, but anyway, that's the way it goes. And that was 2014. We signed the paperwork because we managed to get Dairy Crest to the table because of the campaign and because of the momentum behind it. And they said, okay, we will work with you. We had really, you know, rigorous head of terms. We opened up a building on the site, said, come and tell us what you want on the site. You know, it could be incredible. Obviously, there's some constraints, but we can work around that. Anything is possible. We worked with our design team. There they are with their little heads on sticks. And what we did was we worked with the professional design team and the community to come up with a plan that was possible, but also desirable for the people in the town. We took it to a referendum with the Community Right to Build order, which is part of the Localism Act. We got a valuation on the site, so we knew how much it was worth. We made an offer to Dairy Crest. They were happy with it. We were processing all that. We found out that we'd been successful with £2.5 million of National Lottery funding for the Brunel building, which was the listed building on the site. It took us 2 years to get the Community Right to Build order permission, and it took us another couple of years because of various sort of ins and outs with Dairy Crest and them being bought out by a different company to get to the point where we were about to sign on the dotted line. It was actually January 2020, just before the pandemic. And then they sold it to somebody else. Amazing. Thanks, guys. So at that moment, you're just like, okay, what do we have to do? Like, this is work that takes so much time. It's, you know, it takes, like, you take it step by step. This is a massive undertaking to, you know, sort of at the start, it looks like a massive undertaking to even plan how to do that site. But we did it really carefully. We did it with the people that we work with in the community and around, and also the design team, to really, really know what we needed to do. And step by step, side by side, we did it. And so we obviously at this point needed to regroup. But at the same time, I'd been working with the Lighting Village campaign in London, which some of you may know about. So this is, again, a heart. It's a market, a predominantly Latin-led market, and it was under threat of redevelopment. This is the market. They did a community plan also. This is the community plan. This is how it wanted to be. And they were successful. Last year, we were successful in seeing off the developer who wanted to come along and demolish that and build a massive block of flats. And what has inspired me, and pretty much apart from obviously working with Rob and the other amazing people in Totnes, the thing that has brought me through the last 2 years of knowing that for now we'd lost the site is one of the people who's involved in Lighting Village, Don Carlos, who's been involved since the beginning. He has this strategy, which is basically SRS. It's about to take root. He always had that vision 20 years ago, long before community wealth building. He was like, we will get that building. It will generate income. We will then invest it in other projects in Tottenham. It will be amazing. And somebody asked him in a recruitment process that we had the other day, you know, what is it, you know, what keeps you going with all the obstacles that you've met over the last 20 years? It's documented. You can look up the incredible journey of Lighting the Village campaign. And he just said, I don't think about the obstacles. I think about what I need to do. I think about what we need to do. And I think about how we behave, and we just move forward. And he holds the line. And my God, he's like one of the wisest people I know. And that is what we need to do. And then yesterday they won the Sheila McKechnie Award for Best Community Campaign yesterday, and continue to do amazing things. And so I just wanted to finish by saying what happened when that site was sold was that people in the community stepped up and they started a campaign of their own and said, right, okay, that's not all right. We are going to work with you and we're going to get that site back. And we will get the site back. And that will be relatively soon. And it will be the best party and everybody will be invited. And we need to do more of that. Like the people who've won spaces, the people who are trying to win spaces, we need to get together more and talk about it more and celebrate more, because the joy, I mean, obviously the also like frustration, but the joy is so immense. And so I just wanted to finish on my final slide, which is that another wise man who Rob obviously knows is a guy called Ed Vidler, who was part of the Atmos scheme right at the beginning. So he was part of a sustainable business group, Park Group. And he's a very wise man. He's probably like nearly 80 now. And when we first, you know, got involved and when we signed the contracts, I said to Ed, my God, you know, like, what have we done? Like, that is a massive size, you know, 7 acres, you know, derelict, you know, how do we do it? And he just said, well, Francis, how do you eat an elephant? And I was like, I don't know, Ed, how do you eat an elephant? And he said, one bite at a time. So yeah, that's how I'll end it. But thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Fran. Thank you very, very much. Okay, all right. I do need to add actually, because I can't just let it pass. I will definitely come to the party, but mainly for the cake, because that cake is most awesome. Okay, all right. Needed to be acknowledged, needed to be. All right then, our second speaker is Claude Hendrickson. And Claude was the project manager on the Frontline Community Self-Built scheme in Leeds in 1996, which saw 12 unemployed Afro-Caribbean men and their families build new homes for themselves. He has remained a passionate advocate of Black and marginal groups, we'll say, in terms of housing, self-build and training employment. Claude brings the Together We Can Summit knowledge and experience of working with these groups across Yorkshire, Liverpool, Manchester and York, as well as research and publication skills to help with your project. Now, he is the founder member of Community Self-Build Agency, also known as CSBA, who in recent years have been focused on self-build for ex-homeless soldiers in Bristol. Now, Claude, the floor is yours, and we'd love to hear your reflections on the provocations this next session. Together we can take space and make it our own. Thank you, Claude.
Claude, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, I was about to say, Claude.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whoops.
You got the hair beautiful, but now, yeah.
It's Friday. It's Friday, and I'm not donuting, so you know.
Not yet. Do that. Yeah. Do that in about 10 minutes.
Right. Thank you for the invite to this Together We Can event. Welcome to all the people. Thank you for that introduction, Monica. Yes, Claude Hendrickson from Leeds. I've got this timer on and it's driving me crazy already. Right. So yes, thank you for the invite. You've got my screen. You can all see my screen, yeah? Like it was says, I've been involved in the sector for many years, but what I'm going to do initially is take you through my journey of people coming together to solve their housing issue. as it said, I'm also an accredited community-led housing advisor. I recently became a community land trust ambassador, and I'm an equality and diversity inclusion associate with Leeds Community Homes and People Powered Homes. Most recently, I was involved in a contributor to the Bacon Review into Self-Build. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to take you through a basic history, whistle stop, because I've only got 10 minutes and I usually take longer than that. So here we go. Here we go. How can people create homes that their communities need where the market and developers are failing? And when we talk about community land trusts and when we talk about community self-build or the community-led housing, it's about trying to take that into your hands because the market and developers are failing. So I'm going to give you my journey, my inspiration, my observation of the sector over the last 25 years, implementation and promotion that I'm obviously involved in. So back in the late 60s, I should say, the early 60s and 80s, because I noticed most of the people on the Zoom are 50-ish, so some of them will remember them times. In the area where I lived, what was one of my I lived in an area that had badly maintained housing stock by the local authority, and was subject to postal discrimination. Many times they talk about racial discrimination, but there are areas of the country and areas of cities that are postally discriminated against. So this is where my action started way back in the mid-80s, because I lived in an area that suffered from a lot of this. And then in the 80s, housing associations were empowered, coming to urban areas like Chapeltown, where I live in Leeds, with sweeteners that they would bring jobs and training that never actually materialized. The right to buy was created. Many people bought council houses because the council was not maintaining the housing, but really people were looking for affordable housing. You know, it's really about They used the term social housing, and social housing was supposed to give us affordable housing, but that wasn't necessarily true, because some housing associations have also created rents that have priced people out of the market. So you can't work, you can't get a job and live in some housing associations and, you know, pay your rent and go through. So my journey started way back in 1988 when I encouraged a group of us, all of us were unemployed, to take, especially men, when it comes to that waiting list, are at the bottom of the rug. Single men, you know, young ladies with children will get preference, and other people, elderly people, but young men struggle to get accommodation. So a group of us African Caribbean men that were unemployed, unhoused, decided to take on the challenge. And what you've got down at the bottom there is 25 years later, this is what the houses look like. After 25 years, still in pristine. You know, we laid 92,000 bricks. We laid 50,000 blocks. We put up 8,000 roof tiles. We did everything, landscaping, everything. Many of the guys are now within construction, employing other people. In Leeds, where I live, we have a very good community-led housing sector now. We've got projects like Latch that has been doing up empty properties for the homeless with volunteers. Canopy, you may have all have heard of Lilac. A lot of talk around the country is about Lilac and its big project. We have Gypso, which independent living for members of the local community, about young people that was sofa surfing on an estate. And as we speak now, in Leeds, we've got a project on site called Shako, which is building 29 homes for local people. It's a co-housing project. Hopefully, well, it will be completed by the end of July. You know, I'm very proud to see that happening because it's keeping the drum beating. And I'm flashing through this because I know I've not got a lot of time. I then went on to, as it mentioned, to become a founder member of the Community Self-Build Agency in 2000. And then in 2010, we embarked on a number, because what we realized was that amongst the homeless community, 60 to 70% of all homeless men are actually ex-veterans. So we went on to do a number of veteran projects in Bristol, very successfully in the early 2000s. Community-led housing. Community-led housing is made up of all these parts: custom-built, self-built, cooperatives, UK co-housing, and community land trust. And these have, what I found out, these have always existed in one form or another. But they were always set for a select set of people, and then people were generally so-called middle-class, educated white people living mainly in rural areas. But there has always been a form of self-help housing. And over there, you know, importance of self-help, it improves housing, yes, more housing and cost reduction. In 2012, I became the Northern Community Self-Build Director, because again, within Britain, you have a very north-south divide. You will find that there's lots of projects that have happened in and around the south of England, and not that much that's happened further north. So I started lobbying for more projects to happen in the north of England. In 2015, I was commissioned by Leeds City Council to produce a 10-year strategy into community-led housing, because we wanted the community-led housing sector wanted to contribute to solving the housing crisis that Leeds was facing. So, for example, Leeds needs to build 50,000 houses back then over the 10 preceding years. And we went about wanting to contribute to that, because we find whenever communities go to the table and say, well, we can help solve our housing issue, that the main builders and the local, everybody seems to get a bit frightened. Well, why do you want to get involved? Why do you want to solve your own problem? So again, we want to contribute. And this was the strategy targets that we set back then from the 2015 report. And the upcomings of it is that we wanted to build 30 houses a year over the next 10 years, which in theory is 300 houses out of that 50,000 houses. That would leave 49,000 houses, 49,700 houses that would still be done the traditional way, and we would do 300. Because when it comes to creating communities, it's more than just building homes and houses. There's opportunities for employment, training, and enterprise, because when houses are finished, houses have to be maintained. And I'm quite keeping my eye on the time, so, you know, right with me. I'm a community-led housing advisor funded by the National Community Land Trust Network. I joined Leeds Community Homes as a Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Associate, because obviously many Black and ethnic minority groups were not having access to community-led housing. There seemed to be barriers. So I'm still working as an advisor nationally. January 2020, just before COVID hit, was when I became an accredited advisor. Just recently this year, I've now become a community land trust ambassador. And my role is to get more Black and ethnic minority groups involved in the community-led sector. But as well as that, I'm also working with groups with disability. I'm working with some single women who are fleeing domestic violence. I'm working in some areas across West Yorkshire where there are no Black and ethnic minority people. So I am working across all groups. Community-led housing has multiple outcomes, housing solutions, and you can see them there. Community-based construction skills, tackling the skills gap, youth employment, active participation, confidence building, safer neighborhoods, because if people are involved in building their neighborhoods, they help keep it secure. Rewarding volunteering, and bringing empty homes back into use. Within my strategy document, we looked at how we could utilize retired builders, people who were older guys who were retiring from the construction industry as site supervisors, becoming, and then people who were involved in building their own houses can actually become local contractors and housing maintenance and gather housing maintenance contracts. Successful factors to help the sector thrive. There's a lot there. One of the main ones for me, because I'm aware of my time, is ring fence funding from Homes England and local authorities. I'm lobbying right now as part of the network to have 5% of the Homes England budget ring fenced for community-led housing projects and 5% of the local authorities' budgets, because there seems to be an issue with how it's going to be funded. If they ring fenced an amount of funding, we could continue to work with that funding year on, year in. We've just had a West Yorkshire mayor elected, so we're working with the mayor to try and get her to fund some of that. I got 2 minutes and rolling. Right, I've come to the end. So thank you very much for that. What I've done is just put a picture of Shako, the Shako project there, just to give you a feel. And that project will be open towards the end of July. And, you know, I'm looking forward to going to the opening. It's been 11 years actually in the making to make that project happen. So that was a whistle-stop tour. Thank you very much. I will stop sharing now.
Claude, thank you so much. Absolute blessing. That was brilliant. Thank you very much, and thank you for keeping to time. Are you introducing the third speaker? Do you want me to do that, Rob?
Sorry?
I think it's me.
Yeah. Do you want me to introduce the next speaker, Rob, or do you want to do that?
I think it's me on the thing.
Yeah, go for it.
So our third and final speaker, we're delighted to be joined by Immy Kaur. Immy is co-founder and director of CIVIC Square. CIVIC Square is a public square, neighborhood lab, and creative and participatory platform focused on regenerative civic and social infrastructure within neighborhoods. She's part of the Donut Economics Action Lab advisory team, a Birmingham Hippodrome trustee, a Birmingham Open Media board member, and an Inclusive Economy Partnership board champion, and the National Lottery Community Fund Advisory Board. And she's managed to fit in time among all of that to join us this evening. We're very grateful. Her work has been recognized with a series of honors and awards, such as the Honorary Doctor at Aston University's School of Life and Health Sciences, granted to her in 2019. And in 2020, she was awarded a prestigious Ashoka Fellowship. Immy, over to you. The next 10 minutes is yours.
Thank you so much. I've just realised I definitely need to not send that whole bio because it makes me sound far more impressive than I am, which hopefully is something that I can talk a little bit about now with you all. Can everybody see my slides? I can't seem to see the chat. If someone could just say yes, that would be great. The chat seems to have gone away from me.
Yes.
You're all good. You're all good.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, so I'm going to just hopefully talk through where we are at as a a group of people who started 12 years ago as a excited movement of young people setting up their first little gathering and TEDx event in Birmingham, all the way to where we are at now. And I think that what's really important for me to say is, for those of you who knew us before this, we used to be the Impact Hub in Birmingham. And it's quite important for me to talk about that long arc of the journey. I think Francis showed things that were dated back to 2009, and Claude, again, really inspiring, shared work that has lasted decades. And I don't want to share that because I want to say, oh, it's going to be our lifetime's work and it's going to take forever, and you should definitely put down everything and it's going to take the rest of our lives and make you feel disempowered. I want to say that for a number of reasons. Number one, because I think we should acknowledge, and I can see it in the chat, we should acknowledge that first slide that Francis talked about, the one that makes things feel so unrealistic or so imaginative and in the future that it's almost not possible. But also we need to acknowledge the situation that we are in, the multiple crises we are facing, and the fact that having one step in the future system and trying to build it while sitting firmly and having to exist within the incumbent one, when the incumbent one is struggling so much from so many layers in this country, I don't want to underestimate what that takes. And I want to make sure that, yes, from a real philosophical level, we need to think about this is 7, 8, 10 generation work, this is long-term futures, but also to recognise that the starting point can feel right now both really hopeful when you're on nights like tonight, but then really difficult when you get back. And so on the one hand, yes, this is long, deep lifetimes work, and our generation has a real responsibility now to push that forward as much as possible. But also in the talk, I'm hoping to just go into different parts where I can say there is big picture things we need to think about, but we can all also start where we are. And why I went back to Impact Hub Birmingham is because I wanted to say that this has been bubbling up for many, many years. So what I want you all to think about is not to think about the work you're all involved in now as something separate to this land, housing, community space revolution. It's like a new project that you might start. We've been thinking about the role of multiple creative, diverse ecologies in Birmingham being involved in everything from deep systems challenges to being part of designing and thinking about what the future could look like. These are not separate movements. You don't suddenly go, hey, now we might do land and housing. Hey, we might over the next few years try and take over that space. They're connected. This work that I'm talking about has been building up communities and knowledge and literacy around many different things for many, many different years. For many, many years. And at the Hub, we started this journey when we realised how broken the land contract was. We did lots of work with people like Kate Rayworth and Alistair Parvin, and papers that I can share with you, and work such as this great work that was done by Helsinki Design Lab that really showed the level of brokenness and the level of reimagination that we would need. So literacy and inspiration and getting things going in your place in the smallest and biggest way, even if you're not quite ready to take over a building or a piece of land, it all counts, because there'll be moments where that becomes true for you and you want to be able to stand up as a community and say, yeah, we can do this. And we're part of a wider studio, and I think it's really important to say this because some of what I might talk about might be like, what on earth, how do we even start? But we've been lucky to be part of architects and open source housing and land and furniture and institutional infrastructure organisations for the last 10 years, and all of them have been open sourcing the work that they've been doing to share. So I'd say look up Affordable Land by Alistair Parvin, for example, or have a look at the WikiHouse Skylark project, or have a look at some of what we've shared, or some of the pieces that Dark Matter Labs have talked about, including, and I'll put some links in the chat, the piece about smart commons that starts to break down all these issues that I'm going to talk about in the talk tonight, and start unpacking it, start thinking about what does this mean, share it with your neighbour, get on your front lawn and talk to somebody else about it, so that you can, whilst things feel impossible, you can make sure that you are creating the conditions for things to thrive. And I'm just going to fly through what we've done and where we're up to. At the Impact Hub, like I said, we discovered that horrible bind that we're all in, where we rent from a foreign landlord who has no idea who you are, where you drive up the value in a place, and the better you do, the more the value of that place goes up, and the extraction of that value is never by those who helped to create it. And so we started to design what could a more equitable, radical, collective, circular future look like. As literacy and agency of the climate crisis increased in our community, this started to happen with more vigour and more intention. And what I mean by that is we started to think about every part of the Future Civic Square project, where we wanted community kitchens, shared makerspaces, workspaces, event spaces, studios, library spaces. How could they become beneficial in multiple ways, and most importantly, how could they become resilient, regenerative neighbourhood infrastructure through hopefully what will be a just and equitable climate transition. And we started to really deep some of the ideas of people like Kate Raworth and Donut Economics, and we centred some of this in our work. And I wanted to share this last few bits with you, where I wanted to say in the work that we're doing, ignore all of this, just look at the colours on the right hand side. In this work, we've discovered that 3 things simultaneously are really, really important, and this is how we're organising. Under the surface, there is the dark matter, the finance, the governance, the things that drive how everything happens on the surface that we don't see. So we need to unpack that. Some of the speakers before have talked about this. At the top, we know we still need to be bold. We need to think hundreds of years into the future. We need to dream futures that are radical and regenerative and are beyond some of the horrors and traps of the current incumbent system. But we can't just stay deep in the technicality, and we can't just dream hundreds of years in the future. We also need to make this everyday and practical, and that's what we've been doing. We've centred the donor at the heart of how we're going to design this, and we've been putting together a plan for what it looks like to build civic and social infrastructure at the heart of the neighbourhood that speaks to what we learned so deeply in the pandemic, that at the heart of our neighbourhoods is often where we can find the deepest social capital, where our resources, our literacy of how we together can share food, can create, can retrofit our homes, can learn new skills, can share items, can reduce consumption, can grow food together, can build social capital, can reduce loneliness, where creativity that helps us imagine those bold futures can thrive. And we can use those as sites, not just for our own indulgence, but as sites to really catalyse community housing projects, retrofit projects, decarbonisation projects, growing, and so on and so on. And that's what we've been working on. We've been working at many layers. So we've been doing all the big thinking about what the site could look like, what it could be like, what the business model would be, what the timeline over the next decade could be, turning these old industrial buildings that sat at the side of the canal and were part of some of the largest extraction from the global south in over the last 400 years of colonial rule of that time over so much of the global south. And how can we rewrite that story to one where our industrial revolution that did make many people wealthy and had some real great positives and took many things forward, but also disproportionately meant the global north obliterated our fair share of what we should be doing? How can we rewrite that story? How can we turn these old buildings into a public square that is strong, bold civic infrastructure for the future? And I'm sharing some of these pictures to help you see that we've been doing a lot of that feasibility work, a lot of the phasing, a lot of looking at how spaces like maker spaces could catalyse zero carbon house supply chains. And we've been thinking about the temporary spaces that get you there, how we could phase this over many years. And I'm sharing this again to show you the different scales of work that we've been trying to do, and how each of these is a tentacle that I could do probably an hour talk on each in itself. But we've also been thinking about how do we do and how do we work across the neighbourhood. So the last couple of years, a lot of our building work was delayed quite significantly due to the pandemic. So we started to think about how we start grow sites, play sites, work across different parts of the neighbourhood, working with a number of partners, but also hopefully as much as we can getting involved with the incredible work happening across Ladywood in Birmingham. And so these are some examples of where we're heading. But to say what we did when everything was delayed, and this is why I wanted to talk about about the fact that there's ways forward when the big picture seems so unwieldy and so far away. And I just want to finish by saying that we started with some really practical things. When I saw this picture and the huge delays of the pandemic stopped our building and our negotiations with the developer, which I can talk about in the chat later, slowed down, we started to activate in every single way, whether it was through play streets, through a pop-up coffee shop, through donut dreams, through building structures across different schools and engaging with children and families. And we started to co-design the future of the buildings, the future of thriving neighbourhoods through practical, everyday participatory ways. And this was really important for us, just to claim space, to inspire, to make sure that we weren't sat around waiting on a developer's timeline or a landowner's timeline, and we weren't just protesting and we weren't just being oppositional, which I think is really important, but often can also burn our energy out. We were being propositional. We were showing what could be possible, what would happen when communities like ours take over sites and build regenerative infrastructure for the climate transition. We used questions from Donut to make sure how we design the space and we design the infrastructure can play out, and we've been doing lots of things like this. And here's some final pictures to show you how we've been doing that. But what we've not just been doing is trying to do it in isolation by ourselves, warts and all. We've been trying to share with peers and connect and build micro programs in neighbourhoods and streets across the country, of which these groups have loads to now share. And why some of that is important is because what we have been doing is not just waiting for those big moments. On the front of our streets, out in any space that we can, we've been starting the conversation. This is one about retrofit. This is one about zero carbon homes and small sites across the neighbourhood that are too small for developers to develop, but too big to just leave. When I say too small for developers, I mean they don't think it's viable, and to look at how small sites could create a revolution of small and medium-sized developers using self-build technology. But we've been starting the conversation and the work anywhere we can. In the back, we've been doing all of that feasibility work and negotiating the incumbent system of developers and landowners and securing a long-term lease and option to buy on that building, which is taking a lot of time. And so what I wanted to say was that we know from so many pioneers that we've learned from, people like Atmos for Totnes and so on, that this could take decades. And so in order to do that, making sure that everyone's not sitting around waiting for that, but actually every street corner, every tree that you can pop up a table under, every moment that we can use the assets that are already there to build on incredible energy and interest and make more of the future feasible and possible. I wanted to finish by saying I think this is what we're trying to do, but to also say that whilst it is beautiful and inspiring and incredible what's happening across the country, we shouldn't underestimate the incumbent system that we're in and the fight we're going to need to have and the solidarity we're going to have. And also we shouldn't pretend that the ideas and the amount of possibility and energy and ideas for our high streets and for our empty buildings aren't abundant. They're not that we don't have enough ideas. There is real serious structural issues about how we govern, how we finance the land contract, and we should make sure that as a community that is in solidarity, that we are growing the movement, that people are understanding to work at many of those different layers together. So that's a little bit of what we're doing. It doesn't seek to have the answers. It's just trying to ask more questions and keep practically going, and hopefully have something to show you in the next couple of years. Thank you very much.
It's over to you now, really. The chat box is open. You have three fantastic speakers, as you've heard, to ask questions. And what we're going to do while you're doing that, and while hopefully the chat box is filling up with lots of incisive and fantastic questions, we're going to ask each of our three speakers if they might just share any reflections on what they've heard from the other speakers. This is one of my favorite bits of this, when we get to see a kind of cross-pollination across between the different people who are speaking. So maybe Francis, should we start with you? Was there what did you hear from the other speakers that struck you, was new to you, was particularly inspiring, anything that you'd like to reflect on?
Yeah, I mean, so much. It's incredible. I think the thing that I was reflecting on when I was putting together a presentation is that there is so much going on that we don't know about. Like, I kind of know what Claude does, but I didn't know that detail, which is like, and the history and just the doing at the same time as the strategic stuff. And the same with Immy as well. It's like, how do we get together in rooms more often and talk about it more, and then kind of like bring a friend and then make these rings of sort of like circles within circles that then bring in more circles? Because I know we're all so busy doing the stuff, but it's, yeah, maybe, you know, that whole sort of movement building thing, I've been involved, and partly that's, you know, something that I haven't done. Like, I've been to Bradford and I've not gone across and chatted to Claude. So, you know, I'd love to do that. And the same if I'm in Birmingham, I've never been to Civic Square. So there's something on us to think about that. But also, yeah, I think being able to have these spaces where we can share this stuff like more regularly and physically as well, in person, if we could do that. And how, yeah, maybe, you know, like how Transition Network can enable that, but other organizations as well, and how we can do that ourselves. So that, yeah, that's my main reflection.
Beautiful, thank you, thank you, thank you. So do keep popping questions into the chat. And Claude, any reflections you might have on what you've heard so far this evening?
Number one, I only had 2 people in my room, so I don't know how that broke out and that. But the gentleman from Milton Keynes was talking about, you know, how great it is to have things like this, but how hard it is to get around the barriers that are put up by institutions. And Yumi, that was in my group, talked a lot about Birmingham experience and the work that she does with young people, and how we can bring young people to the table and get them involved. So we had an in-depth 3-way conversation. Rob ducked out quickly. I don't know where he went. He went into a fuller room. But yeah, I suppose just going back on what Francis said, I think the sharing of good practice, the knowledge of what actually is going on out there, it can be very inspiring and get people motivated. And so yeah, it is about sharing your thoughts and sharing good practice. Yeah, that's why I got, and you know, I'm gonna link up with Yumi hopefully and go down and have a look at some of the projects in Birmingham. Because I go to Birmingham regularly, and we talked about Milton Keynes. Milton Keynes, the new part of Milton Keynes back in 1999 was a city that was created. That new Milton Keynes was a city that was created that was supposed to be, this is how the new cities are going to be going forward. So there was a lot of self-build. Architects and retired individuals did quite a lot of singular houses down in Milton Keynes. There's a part of Milton Keynes that has got some really unique houses, like a garden on the roof and stuff like that. Not just the ceramic cows that they've got, but so, you know, Milton Keynes was supposed to be a catalyst for what we're talking about now. So yeah, that's what I got from the people I was in the room. But Francis's point is important, that sharing good practice. And after 25 years of being in and around the sector and banging the drum, that is one of the greatest things when I've come back to the sector, that they've created, that community land trust is more obvious now, it's out there. And these community-led advisors, I think they've trained up something like 130 odd community-led advisors nationally. And the community-led housing website has masses of information. The Community Land Trust website has masses of information. I think the social media platform has given us this opportunity to share good practice.
Thank you, Claude. Immy.
I think a couple of things stood out for me, which is the tenacity of the work that's happening and the accidental, I would say, because I'm pretty sure, I mean, unless Francis and Claude kind of massively disagree, when we started out on these journeys, I'm pretty sure nobody thought it would take this long, right, and have as many bumps as in the road. But how that's really built deep links for me about how this is generational work, and how we can create the conditions to get more comfortable and collective in that. I also agree with the sharing practice. I'm really lucky to, I think Carol's actually here today, but there's incredible groups around in B16 really questioning what's happening with our public buildings, what's happening with regeneration and development. And we're very lucky, like Rob and Co, to be in quite a strong convening position. So I'll be delighted if we wanted to do an in-person session like this in a neighbourhood and start to really share practice and hear much more from Francis and Claude and others in the summer. If people were up for that, I'll get in touch with you guys to help maybe do this together. But I think because there's so much immersion in that, I guess what I was trying not to be was a buzzkill, but what I was trying to kind of say really, I think was really riffing as well off what Claude and Francis were saying, was that there are going to be a lot of bumps in the road here, and there are a lot of there's a lot that needs to happen to create the networks that can support each other through this, through all those bumps, to understand this deeply as generational work. And the thing that I don't know, it didn't really come up, but I'd be interested to know what Claude and Francis think about this and others do, is that this is not a pure radical journey as well. The amount of tensions and contradictions and moments where you have to kind of play within the current system and think about the future, how you have to balance the trust of your communities and the work you're doing with understanding that you're not playing with partners or landowners that are in the same situation with you, and you're having to figure out what that balance is. So yeah, for me it was just really inspiring to be part of a long arc, I guess, of people trying in all different ways, but there seemed to be some reshared themes amongst us, and it was just really exciting to be able to hear that, and also still hear the conviction in Claude and Francis's voices, because when I first started this work, there was definitely a generation just above me, particularly in Birmingham, quite burnt and upset with how things had happened with the council, the shift of things, and were quite kind of disparaging. But I always thought they were just broken-hearted cynics. They were people that really tried in their time, and then that, you know, were pushed down by so many things. And I can see David here as well, who's in Birmingham, and Carol, who's in Birmingham. There's something so important about that generation, just 10, 20, 30 years older than you, like holding out the baton and saying, look, I know you're thinking about it differently, but I support that, and us kind of looking that in that direction and looking and being down, looking to hold that baton out to people like Yumna and her generation as well. So there's something about the intergenerational movements that I think, with all the sharing of good practice, we also need to really nurture, because this is so hard, and we're going to need to find both inspiring but also deep ways to support each other and help each other to not be completely burnt out or broken by this, or have minor hiccups which then funders and others use against you as part of that narrative that Francis talked about. It's just not possible to do what you're saying, which then sets everybody back again, instead of being more generative and propelling us all forward. So yeah, it was. I've really enjoyed this evening and listening to the others, and particularly hearing about Claude's work, because I've never really heard about it, and it's just criminal, isn't it, really? So thank you so much, Transition Together, for bringing us together.
Thank you, Immy, so much. Yeah, it reminded me when you were talking about the intergenerational thing, that when during the Atmos project, when we first had the big meeting with Dairy Crest, who owned the land, the first time we met with them, and that made me a great believer in patience and stubbornness, which was when one of them at the end of the meeting, when they'd for the first time eyeballed us across a table, and they could see that stubbornness in our eyes that said, we'll still be here in 10 years. We're not going anywhere. We're the future of this place. And at the end, the guy said, we are committed to working with you, partly because we have no choice. It's like, yeah, you had no choice 7 years ago, you know, so that it's a really interesting way to think of it as generational projects. So thanks for that, Immy.
Yeah, and in response to that, Rob, so many people who are landowners have brands and companies and things that that they want to protect, and one of the reasons we crawl all, I mean, don't tweet this anyone, but crawl all over ours and make sure they know that we're there, is because if they do the dirty on us, you know, we'll use the full wealth of community power to make sure that people know, because the generations coming above are having much less patience with corporate interests that are obviously extractive and disgusting and so on. So if we can do that in a propositional way, so it's not just a fight against them, cool, that's how I want to do it, that's how I want to create generative futures. But, you know, if we have to backlash, we also will, and we won't go away. And I think there's something about just shifting the Titanic a bit by making it impossible for that horrendous behaviour to continue, that's extractive and that makes a profit off every bit of labour and energy that communities put into making better places happen.
Beautifully put. Thank you, Immy. Thank you. So, so we've only got 2 questions so far. There's plenty of scope for everybody to chip in questions here. Simeon, would you like to unmute your microphone and ask your question to the panel here?
Yeah, so I'd like to ask the panelists in particular, but anyone else may have insights on this. So do you have any insights into developing and managing capacity within your groups? And I ask this because we've just set up a new neighbourhood forum in a local part of Norwich, and we're really struggling at the moment with just having enough time and energy amongst the small pool of volunteers to generate enough momentum to keep us progressing forward. And yeah, I'm hoping that you might be able to give us some tips.
Who'd like to start us with that one? Claude, maybe.
What I will say to you, number one, is projects like taking control are never easy and necessarily quick. So, you know, this is one of the things, even with our project, it took from the inception of the idea to actually getting on site, it took 6 years. And within that time, you've got to accept you're going to have group dynamics, you know, individuals coming together. And, you know, you've got to find a way of everybody singing from the same hymn sheet, so to speak. So what I would say is it's important with your group members that they kind of list what they think they're bringing to the table so that you're all aware of what each of you offer. Because a lot of times you can put groups of people together and they say, yeah, I want to do this and I want to do this, but they've not got no experience in it. So I think it's important that if you're going to form a group, that you really get to know each other and understand what each other bring to the table. And then it serves for a better movement forward because you know a bit more about each other. Some people might like taking minutes at a meeting. That may be all that they can bring to the meeting, but that's a good situation, you know, because you have to elect a chair, you have to have a treasurer, you have to have a secretary, you have to have a structure, because if you're going to go forward, and you need to have the best person within the group in that role. So I would say, you know, maybe everybody coming into the group writes a little pen picture of themselves so you can get an idea what they do and what they've done with their life before they've come to the table. Because people go into groups and they can be, you know, you create a group and it might be a friend of yours or a friend of your girlfriend's or somebody that you just met on the road, but what actually do they bring to the table? They can't just bring their body. They need to be bringing, what do they bring? And it's a way of groups sometimes sit in meetings all the time. They don't know very much about each other, and you need to learn about that. That's what I would do, Simeon. I would, you know, create a situation where it's almost like you bring a CV or a pen picture of yourself, and then everybody knows what everybody else offers.
Thank you, Claude. Fantastic. Francis, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, Claude's absolutely right. I think it's kind of not assuming that people want to be involved in possibly the way that you are. So, I mean, that's basically what Claude's saying. But like the people that you talk to in the street, you know, you can have conversations with them and they might just go, well, that's interesting. And then they wander off, but they'll kind of come back. So if you think of it as a longer term thing and what you're sort of moving towards, then you can kind of almost remember those people. And the more conversations you can have in different, you know, in your place where you are, then I was just thinking about Atmos Voices, Rob, when you went out and Rob took a did you take a dictaphone round people? And just ask them what their vision was for the Atmos site. I mean, it was sometimes you just need something that's a very clear ask for people. It's very difficult. I mean, I still can't describe what I do to people. Like it's, you know, the worst question at a party. It's like, oh, Jesus, you know, I'm just going to pretend that, you know, like I'm a butcher or something, and hope that nobody has some real deep insight into butchery. Because you're like, it's so amorphous, right? But if you're really clear about the one thing, and that's what Atmos was really helpful for. It was, you know, it wasn't just transition generally. It was like, that is a thing people can understand and see. And so having those conversations, let it mull, you know, let people think about it, and then they'll come back, and then you grow, and then some people can step out and step in, and, you know, hopefully that's how it can kind of develop. Yeah.
Thank you. Beautiful. Immy?
So Safi's here, and I was thinking about how would I answer this, and I think at some point, you know, maybe if there is time, I'd be really interested. I've known Safi for the last nearly 10 years now, and I'd be interested for Safi to say why she thinks we continue to like build momentum in what we do, in the things that we do, if she thinks we do, because I think that it's hard for me to answer that on behalf of ourselves. But what I can say is that I don't know if this is the answer you want to hear, but I learned really, really early on, when those first 100 people came to TEDx back in 2011, that our role was to create the platform, the invitation, and to be there consistently, compounding that learning, growing, slowly building the ambition, creating as much of the North Star as possible, and then creating the next tangible steps, even if the next tangible steps are just having a cup of coffee together, or playing the video of a talk from someone, or so on. I personally, this is not to devalue what Claude and Francis have said, because what they've said is really actually then how you start to build up the groups. But at the beginning, I personally, and all the way along, always have had an open invitation for anyone to join at any point, this movement of work. And then slowly, as skills and energy and alignment, in terms of what Claude was saying, there's always going to be people politics. You don't love working with everyone, you don't love spending all the time with everyone, that's okay. As those things started to come together, then we gave it a bit more structure, just enough structure, a bit more. I've always been the sort of holder of the flag, you know, the North Star that we're heading towards, and then working backwards of how we might do that. But I didn't start with how do you create the governance and structure and name of a group and all of that. I started with, how is this joyful? How is this so much better than the current system of how we want to spend our evenings or weekends? And then slowly became like very lucky for it to become our roles, our jobs, our lives. And I kept building on that. And even now, you know, this is not to kind of big ourselves up in a numbers way. It's just to say, even now, with thousands of people having been to TEDx, with hundreds of people part of our global donor economics work and stuff, I still hold that same role: create the platform, create the tools, keep an open door to anyone who's coming in for the first time, and to be the people who want to create that structure. The thing that I've not seen work, and I just want to say this from my perspective, please do not take this on behalf of this event, is that there are people who are like, I've got this idea, I'm just going to do this first little bit, and someone will hopefully take it and make that thing happen, and then I'm just going to exit. Right, I'm a starter of things. I start things off, Yes, sort of. Like, okay, 0-0 is a bit of an example of that. My colleague Inti Johar like starts things and then builds teams that are much better around him, and flies off. But I've not seen that kind of hands-on. I'm just going to hands off. I'm going to do a little bit, and then somebody else do all the mucky work of wading through all those contradictions of the current system and the future and what we want to do. So I would say that it's okay to be honest with yourself if this isn't your life's work, but not to just be like, hey, I'll just do a few things and then just like somebody else will take over. But if you can make it a joyful, incredible way of living your life and existing in the world, and build other people around you who can do that, and obviously create the boundaries and balance you need to actually have a life. But like Rakesh was saying, bring your children, bring your neighbours, start in your front, like make this life, make this dreamy, make it something that you want to spend your life doing, because the challenges that are up against us currently are really, really tough. It's going to take all the heart and soul and momentum and solidarity to get there. And so I would say that's how we started. But of course, people like Claude and others would be able to give you much more details about like how then you need a copywriter, you need this person, and you need all of that. I'm not ignoring that, because of course we have that now, but I don't think that's the start point. I genuinely don't. And there will be lots of bumps in the road, but I think one thing that's clear between all of us here, and if we had many other people here from, you know, Maya from the Black Land Justice Project, from loads of the amazing projects doing work, Lion, everything, you know, they would say they had plenty of bumps in the road. But the thing you can see is we're all still here 5, 10, 15 years later. And instead of that being like something that destroys your soul, you can make it into joyful, intergenerational, deep work that is it's life. And that's how I survive. And so I'm still over the moon when I see Safi or Carol or David, or because this is, I think we're forging friendships as well as so much else. And we see each other through all of those things. And Rob and everyone, I mean, we all just there for each other over time. So I think we just have to keep growing those solidarities. And Kate Rayworth always says, don't knock on closed doors, go where the energy is. So just, there's plenty of energy. It might just take a bit of time to find, and a couple of Bakewell tarts and cups of tea to attract those people. And you might have a few false starts. Don't worry about that. Don't take it personally either.
I think I'd like to just add to that. I think you have a point in that, again, within your group, you create strength. So if, and I'm Rakesh, I'm Rootsman and Vanetta, but I think you're right to a fashion, but then even if you're going to have children there attending, then you let some people lead on the children part of the work, and you let other people, you give them roles that may fit them, but you have to still have a structure. You know, even if you're going to have kids there, you have to have risk assessment. You have to do this. You have to make sure that they're going to be all right. You have, you know, you still have to think of health and well-being. So I accept that the door has to be open, but sometimes you can have a situation where you've had a group of people together for 6 months, really good, and you bring in a new person, and that new person just creates waves because they haven't been there for 6 months. But you want the open door, you want the freedom of everybody can engage, but you don't want to unravel what you've done previously. And I'll just add that bit for me. Rob, take the next question. I mean, the next person.
I'll go.
Over to Monica, who's got the next
Monica.
question.
Right, Claude, I actually did have a question for you, actually. So when I saw the house building thing that you've done in Yorkshire, wasn't it? I recall, was there something similar that happened also in Birmingham? Because I think I remember that happening in the late 1990s, early 2000s, yeah. And they did that exact same thing. Yeah. And surprisingly, it was Black people again. So I don't know, was there an actual push for it to be actual Black people of color, or because I wasn't aware of it. I just thought that was pretty cool in the day. But are you aware that was something that happened across the country then?
Yeah, I was aware, and within my breakout group, I mentioned that for example, there was a project in Lewisham, which was a Walter Siegel house building, which was done by a mixed group, mainly Caribbean people. There was Birmingham, there was Bristol. So 20 odd years ago, Black and ethnic minority people have been involved in this sector. I mean, and when I came back to this sector over the last 5, 6 years, I found out that, for example, the Community Land Trust network, the Community Land Trust fraternity was born out of the civil rights movement in America, right? That's where the Community Land Trust came from. So yes, and I'm right now I'm doing some research into the community-led housing sector and asking that question: how comes there are no Black leaders within the sector? How comes there's no Black people that were involved in these projects 20 years ago are doing what I'm doing and trying to get out there and share good practice? So yes, you know, and the question is, obviously, when it sometimes comes to minority groups, they say that we're hard to reach, but I often say we're not hard to reach. We've been easy to ignore. You know, we've been ignored. We're not hard to reach. And this is not just Black and ethnic minority. These are people with disability. This is now the LGBT communities. This is now, you know, women fleeing domestic violence. They say we're hard to reach. We're not hard to reach. We've been easy to ignore for many years. So yeah, we have a history. And what I would say on the back of this is that if you look back even in British history to after the Second World War, when Hitler bombed the place and Germany really wreaked havoc on Britain, self-build and communities coming together to rebuild the country was what happened. And then you look at Africa and you look at the Caribbean, you look at Asia, being involved in building your own house is a natural thing. It's not something, you know, in Britain, they've got this policy, for example, that if you're in housing need, you stand in a queue and you might be waiting in that queue for 5 years, 6 years before you can get accommodation. Whereas in other countries, it's like, if you're willing to help change that, you can make a difference. You can get in there and start digging and start shoveling, because it gives you a sense of purpose. If you don't have a roof over your head or a decent place to live, you cannot have a sense of purpose because you don't know where you drift. Once you've got an idea, well, this is where I live, this is what I've got to make home, that's your sense of purpose. So yes, I think there has been evidence of us being involved in the sector for many years. And I like to believe one of the things that that brought me back to the sector, because I went and worked with young people for like 20 years and ran community organization engaging young people. And then I've come back to the sector, and I've come back to the sector like 18 years later, and I'm saying, well, where's the Black and ethnic minority people? Why are there none in the sector leading? So yes, but we're correcting that now. And I do believe because of social media, because of the internet platform, because of Zoom and this kind of platform, it's been of benefit to us, so we can meet people and share it this way.
Thank you.
And I know Veneta, she's had a hand up for ages. I can see this hand in the right screen, in the left screen there.
Rob, do you want to pick up Venetta's hand?
Thank you, Claude. So I'll see if I can lower my hand. Bless, thank you. Bless, thank you. I just wanted to make a comment to say to all of you, I came late to the meeting, how totally inspiring it is to hear. Claude, I love that direct energy, and it is a male energy, that where you just kind of put things together and everything, it takes everything forward. And I didn't see your first name because I'm sitting here without my glasses. I've lost them again. That last, the Kaur with a what's your name?
Immy. Immy.
I'm trying to squint at your name. So beautiful words, so nicely put. I just wanted to say that thing about bringing abilities and saying what you bring to a meeting and what you want to take away, that's a lovely structure. But I just want to sort of fly the flag in the corner to remember, first of all, from my own experience as a single mum, that sometimes you just have, the only way you can go to a meeting is to take your kids along. So you don't want it to be such a formal event that you have to do health and safety just because you take your kids along to a meeting, because otherwise it just bars people, and we're beyond that now. Secondly, just to fly the flag to remember that people with differing abilities, so that's, you know, including all your autistic community, all the people with different needs and different scales of needs and different abilities, to be able to voice what they have to offer. Just to remember that sometimes they can't be as clear about what it is to offer, and maybe they don't even know, and it's for, even for anyone, it's a voyage of discovery. So just to bear that in mind, because I've just been to these events in the last few days. I really want to start something up, but I'm not a leader and I don't have people to collaborate with to do anything, but I'm a connector. I'll talk about this meeting and I'll say to somebody it was an amazing meeting and I'll send a link. But I just wanted to remember that, seeing as we're all moving forward as a community, just to remember to bring with us the differently abled, so it's real true inclusivity for all the opportunities that all of you fantastic people are making really happen. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Rob, what are you thinking? Can we take one more?
I think there's one, we could do one last question. The one, Rich, you asked a question about the difference between permanent and temporary spaces, which was really good. Do you want to unmute and ask that?
Sure thing. So my question to the panel is, how do the panel feel about permanence and impermanence in terms of taking space and making it our own? The idea of temporary availability, is there value in that?
Like meanwhile use kind of spaces.
Yeah.
Immy, do you want to go first on this one?
Yeah, of course. I think there is, in the sense of starting things, making things happen. But I think that moving forwards and having the knowledge that we all do now as a collective system about voicing how the economies of meanwhile spaces work, I think engaging communities and working with peers, centering that transparency. And what I mean by that is that meanwhile spaces generally work on a couple of different principles when you go down to the core. Somebody saves some rates by having it occupied. Therefore, most of the time, you're doing that person a favour, that landowner a favour. Secondly, they're offered at short term so that you can go in and create lots of value, and that value is not normally recirculated back to those who create it. So just to create an example, we went to the hub and we uplifted that building and we created loads and loads of value, financial and beyond. And those that were able to capture that value were the private landowners, the fellow people who were landowners in the area, and the collective prices of everything went up, and we never got a share back of that value, let alone any sort of interesting offers or deals to continue to be there. And people will know this all over the place. Artists and community groups are used in this way in many, many ways. Now, to say that there isn't lots of research, development, practice, momentum that can be created by having a meanwhile space is not also true. So I don't believe in these binaries. I believe that we should go into it with eyes open. So a great example that I always say is twofold. A house, if you're going to put the house that I'm sat in on a field in the middle of rural Wales, it would have very different value to putting it in the middle of Birmingham, where I am right now. And the reason for that is because all the things that create the value for that house aren't the bricks and mortar. The bricks will cost roughly the same here as they will 100 miles away, and putting it together might actually be a bit cheaper in the other direction. But over here, it will cost a certain amount. And in rural Wales, miles away from everything, it will cost something else. And that's because the value of this house is made up by the public goods it has access to, the schools, the railways, the shops, the amenities, the groups. And that's what's at the heart of the land contract. And therefore, all of those things that create the house value are not recirculated back into the community. We don't have circular economies where that value creation, and that's why I was saying to everyone, read the Smart Commons proposition by Dark Matter, because they break this down really clearly. All that value that is created by the public sector, by the charitable, by common goods, is captured by the landowner or the person who owns the house. We know this from COVID. House owners earned more than on their homes by sitting in them than nurses did. So the second thing I always say, so I use that example, and the second thing is that land isn't the soil underneath your feet. Land is the papers and contracts that have been made up on top of that soil by humans and have been entrenched and re-entrenched for hundreds of years. Whether it's Alistair or Indy from Dark Matter Labs, or it's Kate who talks about redrawing the economy, these are things that were written and put into place by people, and they can be rewritten. These two concepts, I think, are fundamental. So if you go into meanwhile space, go into it eyes wide open. What are we going to get out of it? Because what we're not going to get is any share of the value. Don't be naive like we were and think, you know what, they'll see what a great job we did and they'll want to keep us because we're really good people. Like, yeah, maybe 1 in 100 that happens, but great people can't outsmart a stinking system at the moment. That isn't how it works. The scale of capital and the scale of power is so, and often those making the decisions are miles away. So I would say, yes, take meanwhile spaces, make amazing things happen, build the confidence of your community, because you can do things in temporary short-term ways, but go into it with your eyes wide open. And if you take the next step, like we are now, which is a step after that, and we were lucky because Indy from DM and Alistair Parvin went in with eyes wide open and told us, you are going to get royally screwed over by this landlord. So make sure the 5 years you're in this building, you learn and create so much and do so much with your community in this space that next time when you go to renegotiate, you have experience behind you and you can show what you've done. But don't for 1 second think you'll outsmart the masses of capital and the foreign landowners that own these buildings in the centre of Birmingham. So go in with your eyes wide open, make sure you get everything you can out of it, make sure you're really clear, don't infantilise your communities, tell them this is the situation and it's still good to get something done. And then the next time, the time after that, when you keep going, come talk to us, come talk to others who are doing amazing things around the piece around long-term leases, options to buy, converting those options to buy into stewardship, because beyond ownership is stewardship. Beyond ownership is stewardship and the commons in really radical, bold ways. Make sure when you take that, you take that next step, that you start to use the social and capital and the work you've done to negotiate far better, and you keep connecting in with communities like this. Just don't go in thinking that meanwhile space will magically change the kind of rotten extractive system currently that the land contract and the economy around those spaces is built on. But don't also just go around shitting on people doing stuff, sorry for that, doing stuff in meanwhile spaces, because it's so inspiring to have stuff to go to and see and do, and like we shouldn't just be all or nothing or pure about it, because then nothing happens. So try and find that bit in the middle and ultimately stay in solidarity with each other, so learning can compound and build, and we all make new mistakes, not repeat the ones that we've all been doing.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Immy. We're coming very close to time now. I don't know, Francis, if you had any little things to add.
Yeah, my thing on that is a bit like what Indy just said, but it's kind of in a different way. I think historically, we as communities, sometimes we've looked at buildings. We see a building and we think, right, we can get that building and we, the community, can use that building. And we've not really concentrated on the land that is around that building. We've been more focused on having the building. I think temporary spaces are good, as in the Deep said, to plan your ideas, try out things, get them ready. And now what I've learned becoming an ambassador for the Community Land Trust is about taking control of land, you know, creating a land trust, and on that land, part of the land might be an old people's home, part of the land might be housing, part of the land might be an allotment that's going to make food. So you're bringing different groups to that one piece of land, as opposed to, so to me, you use the temporary site in a short, quick way to make your plans, to plan exactly what you want. What do we think we want? How do we think it will work? Whilst at the same time, you're eyeing the piece of land you want to get as a community land trust. And when you get that land, you've already drafted up your plan. So even within that, you've got structure. You on the temporary situation, you're creating tentatively your structure that when you move to the what you're looking for, you then implement your plan. That's the short way I see it, you know, because and not to spend too much time worrying about landowners and this and that, because it's not important anymore. What is important is where you're trying to get to. You know, when we did our site, just to give you an idea, there were 6 sites we were looking at as a community, and we said we want these sites. In the end, we had to take a site that was an ex-stone quarry, and we had to do our project, and we made it work. So to me, sometimes they'll give you the worst, but we'll make it the best. So, you know, don't worry about landowners and people. If we spend too much time thinking about the way they're going to trick us, then we're going to lose out. What we've got to do is take the temporary situation, build our plan, and move that plan to the permanent situation.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. We are pretty much completely out of time. Francis, is there anything you would want to add to that? Just like 30
I mean, very briefly, because I mean, I agree with all of that, but I was on Facebook the other day, and there was a meme going around saying, you know, it can't call landlords because it's gendered, and, you know, there needs to be another term for landlords. And so somebody put in the comments, yeah, shelter shits. It just made me really laugh, because they are like, it's a hungry beast. It's like, like they will take everything. And so you just have to be aware of that. But like Claude says, just keep going. Yeah.
Yeah. You talk what I would say, utopia, and that fair, all equal and all embracing world is a good wish. But whether it's going to all happen in your lifetime is not necessarily true. It's about, you know, we're standing on the shoulders of people that have tackled the same issues that we're tackling now. And what we have to do is say, right, we've learned from our parents' generation, we're going to do things a little bit different. And then our children will hopefully do things a little bit different that'll be better for them. You know, it's not necessarily utopia is not necessarily going to happen in our lifetime. It's about contribution, laying the foundation, building on the foundation. That's how I see it anyway.
Thank you. Thank you. Monica,
okay,
thank you. Close us out.
I'm going to close us out as quickly as possible. But I suppose, can I just pick up 2 stuff? Sorry. Well, I think I always live by this thing that I just tell myself, and I tell my children, that life isn't fair, because I always feel like if we get over the fact that life should be fair and we just deal with the fact that it isn't, then we can use our energy to make it much more fairer. And secondly, that reframing that, you know what, people love to give people SHIP, but some people call that manure, and it grows lots of things. So just reframe it, take it, say, oh, thank you, I'm going to grow from that. Anyways, thank you so much for everybody coming today. We really have to close, but before we go, I just want to fly back to Fanny. Please, can you just show me what you've created as a record of this discussion, please? Fanny, just going to send it over to you, please.
Yes, sure. Thank you, Monica. It has been very inspiring. People trying in all different ways to reimagine and retransform the public space. Understanding the land narrative, where is the power, where does it come from, acknowledging that now it's important to hear from people absent of this narrative. And despite this imbalance of power, some communities are doing a huge work to build a fairer future.
Wow.
From community-led housing, creating houses and opportunities for homeless, community-led projects redeveloping, derelicting an industrial site, from people radically transforming a public civic square, and makes change at the heart of the neighborhood. Beautiful, inspiring journeys of solidarity, supporting each other's. Let's keep growing solidarities. Thanks a lot. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
No, thank you, thank you. Honestly, absolutely beautiful. Okay, so you guys, the penultimate day of the Together We Can Summit, I would like us to just thank our guests, Immy Kaur, Claude Hendrickson, and Francis Northrop, by unmuting our microphones and saying thank you, walking in our own unique way. And night, night, people. Thank you, thank you.
Great evening. Thanks ever so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Great inspiration.